Breaking tonight, Canada's defense procurement just became the most sophisticated economic leverage play in the Western world. South Korea didn't see this coming, Germany didn't anticipate the terms, and the submarine contract that everyone assumed was about naval capability, it just became the foundation for reshaping Canada's entire automotive industrial base. Tensions are mounting in Ottawa tonight. Canada announced it would select between South Korean and German submarine bids worth potentially $100 billion over 50 years. But instead of simply evaluating military specifications, the Canadian government attached demands that transformed a defense contract into an industrial policy revolution. Everyone believed Canada's submarine procurement would follow traditional patterns. Defense analysts expected technical evaluations and capability assessments. Military contractors assumed the decision would center on submarine performance. International observers predicted Canada would simply purchase the best available technology and move forward. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, early 2026. Behind closed doors at Industry Minister Melanie Joly's office, Canadian officials drafted language that would redefine how major democracies conduct defense procurement. The requirement was explicit and non-negotiable. Any country wanting Canada's submarine contract must facilitate significant automotive production commitments on Canadian soil. Not promises, not memorandums of understanding, actual production facilities, actual investment, actual manufacturing capacity that creates Canadian jobs and builds Canadian industrial sovereignty. Translation: Canada just told South Korea and Germany that access to a $100 billion defense contract requires transforming Canada's automotive sector. And the leverage? Both countries want this deal desperately enough that they're actually negotiating auto production terms to secure submarine contracts. This wasn't improvisation. This was strategy. Here's how Canada pulled off the most sophisticated defense-to-industrial conversion in modern procurement history, and why this threatens to reshape how every sovereign nation extracts value from a military spending. August 2025. Canada narrowed the submarine competition to 2 finalists. South Korea's Hanwha conglomerate put forward the KSS-III Batch-II, a diesel-electric submarine that represented Seoul's most advanced underwater warfare technology. Germany and Norway, working through ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems, offered the 212CD, Europe's stealth platform designed for modern naval operations. Both submarines could do the job. Both met Canada's operational requirements. Both represented significant technological partnerships that would extend decades into the future. But here's where Canada's approach diverged from every traditional procurement model. Instead of simply evaluating which submarine performed better, Canadian officials asked a completely different question. Which bidding country can deliver the most transformative economic benefits to Canada's industrial base? The answer required automotive production commitments. Consider the strategic brilliance of this approach. Canada needed new submarines, the existing Victoria-class fleet aging beyond reliable service life. That need created procurement leverage. But instead of spending $100 billion purely on military hardware and accepting whatever industrial offsets companies offered as afterthoughts, Canada weaponized that leverage. The message to Seoul and Berlin was unmistakable. You want Canadian defense spending? You deliver Canadian automotive manufacturing. For South Korea, the requirement meant Hyundai, Korea's automotive giant operating within the Hanwha conglomerate structure, would need to establish production facilities in Canada. Not sales operations, not distribution networks, actual manufacturing plants that build vehicles on Canadian soil with Canadian workers. Currently, Hyundai has no automotive production capacity in Canada, making this demand a complete industrial transformation requirement. For Germany, the terms meant Volkswagen would need to expand beyond the PowerCo battery factory already committed to St. Thomas, Ontario. More production, more investment, more integration of German automotive technology into Canadian manufacturing ecosystems. The battery plant represented a start, but Canada wanted comprehensive automotive production expansion as part of any submarine deal. Think about the power dynamic this creates. Both South Korea and Germany desperately want Canada's submarine contract. The $100 billion value over 50 years represents not just immediate revenue, but decades of maintenance, upgrades, training, and technological partnership. Winning this contract means embedding your country's defense industry into Canada's military infrastructure for half a century. That's not just a sale, that's a strategic alliance. But Canada recognized something crucial. That same desperation creating bidding competition could be leveraged to extract industrial commitments that had nothing to do with submarines. If Hanwha and TKMS want access to Canadian defense spending badly enough, they'll pressure their home governments to facilitate automotive investments that Canada couldn't otherwise command. And that's exactly what happened. Youngji Ahn, Chargé d'Affaires at South Korea's Ottawa embassy, released a carefully worded statement acknowledging Seoul's willingness to explore industrial and trade benefits across a range of strategic areas. Translation: South Korea is negotiating automotive production terms to stay competitive for the submarine contract. Germany's embassy response was more cautious, noting German automotive companies already have a strong and well-established presence in Canada, but declining to comment on specific investment plans. Read between those diplomatic lines. Both countries are taking Canada's demands seriously. Both recognize that winning the submarine contract requires satisfying Canada's automotive production requirements. Both are engaging with a fundamental premise that defense procurement can and should be leveraged for broader industrial policy objectives. Stephen Fuhr, Canada's Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, made the strategic logic explicit and public. Canada will select the submarine bid that creates the most Canadian jobs. Not the fastest submarine, not the stealthiest platform, not the most technologically advanced vessel. The bid that generates maximum Canadian employment and industrial capacity. That's not defense procurement. That's economic sovereignty masked as military spending. Flavio Volpi, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, recognized exactly what Canada was engineering. A Canada that significantly increases defense spending has to find new ways to get additional industrial benefits for the hardware spend. Tying the purchase of some of the world's most advanced military equipment to investments in Canada's world-class automotive sector seems pretty smart to me. Translation: Canada just invented a model for converting defense spending into comprehensive industrial policy, and the automotive sector is merely the first target. Think about the implications. Canada is currently committed to significantly increasing defense spending to meet NATO requirements and respond to evolving security threats. That increased spend in 5G represents massive procurement contracts across multiple defense sectors: submarines, fighter aircraft, naval vessels, armored vehicles, missile systems, cybersecurity platforms. Every single one of those contracts creates leverage identical to what Canada is now applying to submarine procurement. What if Canada demands aerospace production commitments from fighter jet bidders? What if naval vessel contracts require shipbuilding technology transfers beyond what traditional offsets provide? What if cyber defense contracts mandate Canadian data center construction and a digital infrastructure investment? Suddenly, Canada's defense budget transformation from roughly 1.4% of GDP to potentially 5% isn't just military spending. It becomes the largest industrial policy lever in Canadian history, forcing international defense contractors to facilitate broader economic investments as the price of accessing Canadian procurement budgets. This is how sovereign nations reclaim economic control in the 21st century. The traditional model treated defense procurement as separate from industrial policy. You bought the best military equipment available, accepted whatever industrial participation the contractor offered, and hoped some technology transfer occurred. That model treated economic benefits as secondary considerations, nice bonuses if they materialized, but not primary procurement objectives. Canada's new model inverts that relationship entirely. Economic benefits aren't secondary considerations, they're primary requirements. Military capability remains important. Both submarine options meet operational needs. But the deciding factor isn't which submarine operates more quietly or carries more missiles. The deciding factor is which bidding country facilitates more transformative Canadian industrial development. South Korea wants to sell submarines. Hyundai builds automotive production facilities in Canada. Germany wants the contract. Volkswagen expands Canadian manufacturing beyond battery plants. Sweden or France or the United Kingdom or any other country wants to compete for future Canadian defense contracts. Better start identifying what industrial investments you're willing to facilitate as the price of entry. And here's what makes this approach particularly sophisticated. Canada isn't demanding direct quid pro quo arrangements that might violate international trade agreements. The government isn't telling Hanwha or TKMS that submarine contracts are contingent on specific automotive investments. Instead, Canada is asking bidding governments to facilitate automotive commitments, creating government-to-government arrangements where Seoul or Berlin encourages their domestic companies to invest in Canada. That distinction matters legally and diplomatically. It allows Canada to maintain that submarine selection is based on comprehensive national interest evaluation rather than explicit contract for investment exchanges. But the practical reality, crystal clear. You want the submarine contract? Deliver automotive production. Dear viewers, between 2024 and August 2025, something extraordinary just happened in Canadian defense procurement. Traditional models said evaluate submarines purely on military merit. International contractors expected technical competitions focused on capability assessments. Defense analysts assumed Canada would follow conventional procurement patterns. Canada said no. And what emerged was a procurement model that treats defense spending not as isolated military investment, but as comprehensive economic leverage capable of reshaping entire industrial sectors. The submarine contract became the tool. Automotive production became the objective. And South Korea and Germany, sophisticated economic powers with advanced defense industries, are actually negotiating terms because they recognize Canada holds strategic leverage they can't ignore. This isn't just about 12 submarines. This is about fundamentally transforming how sovereign nations extract value from military budgets. Canada's defense spending increase represents hundreds of billions of dollars in a future procurement across multiple sectors. Every single contract now becomes an opportunity to demand industrial investments, technology transfers, production facilities, and manufacturing capacity that builds Canadian economic sovereignty. The model Canada is pioneering threatens to spread. What happens when Australia starts demanding similar industrial commitments from defense contractors? What if European nations begin leveraging military procurement for economic policy objectives? What if every democratic ally currently increasing defense spending in response to global security threats decides that military budgets should simultaneously advance industrial sovereignty? Suddenly, international defense contractors face a completely different competitive landscape. Winning contracts requires not just superior military technology, but comprehensive industrial investment commitments. Countries with stronger manufacturing sectors and more willingness to establish foreign production facilities gain procurement advantages over competitors offering purely military capability. That changes everything about how defense industries operate and how nations approach military spending. The submarine decision is expected in 2026. Whether Canada selects Hanwha's KSS-III Batch-II or TKMS's 212 CD matters less than the broader precedent being established. Whichever country wins, they will have agreed to facilitate automotive production commitments that Canada couldn't otherwise command. And every future Canadian defense procurement will reference this submarine contract as the model. Want Canadian military spending? Deliver Canadian industrial transformation? South Korea is negotiating automotive investments to sell submarines. Germany is evaluating expanded production commitments to secure defense contracts. And Canada, methodically leveraging its $100 billion procurement budget, just demonstrated that defense spending can be converted into comprehensive industrial policy if you are strategic enough to demand it. This is sovereignty in action, not rhetoric, not aspiration, actual leverage applied systematically to extract maximum economic value from necessary military spending. The kind of strategic procurement that builds industrial capacity while maintaining defense capabilities. The kind of approach that recognizes defense budgets shouldn't just purchase security, they should build economic resilience. The submarines will arrive eventually. KSS-III Batch-II or 212 CD, whichever Canada selects, will serve the Navy well. But the real victory isn't underwater capability. It's the industrial commitments Canada extracted as the price of that capability. Automotive production facilities that wouldn't exist without defense procurement leverage. Manufacturing investments that transform Canadian industrial capacity while meeting naval requirements. That's how 21st century nations convert military necessity into economic advantage. And Canada just showed every ally watching exactly how it's done.